Many times for gay men, it's very easy to move into overt sexualization, but most gay men also have a lot of issues around vulnerability, authenticity, intimacy, connection. And so I think it's a lot more interesting to kind of play with that middle ground space of saying, hey, I might invite you to come here and we might do some shared breath work and do some pranayama together, and I might hold you. But what is it like to actually just allow someone to hold you? Like, when was the last time you let somebody cradle you and you had nothing you had to do in return? You just had to sit there and breathe. And you'll see these guys who would have had no issue taking off their pants and getting busy, asking them to just be held and to breathe, and they break down sobbing. Because they're like, I don't know how to do this. And I think there is such a lack of intimacy, like true intimacy in the gay world, and lacking of connection. I have heard from individuals saying, I'll go try and get a hookup on Grindr, but really the only thing that I wanted was to be held. And so I'll go with someone just so I can have the cuddles at the end. How sad that is that we live in a world where it's not okay to just ask for that. It's not okay to say, I want to be held and cared for. And we live in a world that is often so uncaring and so inconsiderate and sometimes even cruel. And it doesn't give us the space to be vulnerable and to really ask for what we want. You know, gay culture can be very performative as opposed to just being real, and opposed to just having a really heartfelt connection and say, hey, I've been on a journey. It's been hard. Can I share a little bit of it with you? And let's have a moment of coming together soul to soul. And that's what interests me. So I had the beautiful opportunity this week to chat with one of the guys at Yogis with Pride, which is an online community that does naked yoga. It's pretty aligned with what we do here, and the conversation was really beautiful. We dove into topics like intimacy and connection and vulnerability. We talked about what is the point of physical practice, how does it relate to the larger yogic path. And this conversation was originally for their Patreon, but now that it's been posted there for a little bit, I thought it'd be great to share it with you all. I also thought you guys would enjoy getting to know them, and if you love doing clothing optional yoga, maybe head over to their Patreon and join them for a class sometime. At the end of this video is a really grounding, centering meditation, so hang on till the end so you get to enjoy that as well. Much love for you all.
Hey Yogis, this is Richard from Yogis with Pride, and today I have the honor of having Kaylin from Ecstatic Self here live on the channel. So Kaylin, thanks so much for taking the time to do this with me.
Oh, it's my sincere pleasure. I mean, I have been a yogi, since college. I started getting into physical yoga and meditation and took a guru, moved into an ashram for 7 years. So it was a very foundational part of my spiritual journey. And while I don't necessarily identify so much anymore of practicing only in a yogic tradition, it very much laid the groundwork for everything I do. So I'm so happy to be here and have this conversation with you today.
Thank you. So, did you do like more of a physical practice, or were you more, I guess if you were in an ashram, more on the philosophical part of it?
Yeah, so when I was in university, I started wanting to dive deeper into more ecstatic states of being, having a deeper connection with God, consciousness, more mystical experiences. And I started looking for a new religion and didn't find anything that really spoke to me. I went and visited temples and mosques and various places, and nothing felt really resonant. But I started taking physical yoga around this same time at this wonderful gym near my university in Evanston, Illinois. And there were a couple teachers I really connected with. And there was this one teacher who would do an hour and a half of physical yoga, followed by an hour of meditation. And I actually originally went to the meditation class because I misread the poster and thought it was like a musical thing, like, oh, these are going to be playing this musical instrument. And it ended up just being silent meditation, but it ended up being great. And she really encouraged me to go and do yoga teacher training. So the summer before my senior year, about a year after I started getting into it, I went and spent part of my summer in Colorado in the Rocky Mountains and did a 4-week-long immersive Hatha yoga teacher training program, and then also a week of meditation teacher training. And for me, it was a coming home experience. It was this feeling of, both in the physical practice and in the more meditative side of things, a deep sense of my questions being answered. Finally, finding practical tools to tap into altered states of consciousness, into my authentic self, into a more joyful state of being, a more clear state of being. And so when I moved back to Chicago, back to Evanston for my final year, I began teaching yoga. So I ended up teaching at this yoga teacher's studio in Chicago. So I would bicycle down at 6 a.m. in the morning to go teach sunrise yoga classes and go for morning meditations. And when I graduated, I moved into their little ashram community that they were creating, a little hub of yogis and meditators. And for almost 7 years, that was a big part of my life. I'd have pre-dawn meditation classes, evening meditation classes, do selfless service. I would teach at the yoga studio multiple times a week, and then also teach yoga around town. I taught at Northwestern. I taught at several of the big gyms in Chicago, a couple of the yoga studios. And that was my life for several years. Since then, I have separated ways from that yoga community, and I've really been on an adventure of finding a spiritual path that is separated from any specific tradition, to really find something that felt intrinsically my own, something that was organic to me, and kind of stripping away a little bit of cultural appropriation. I think yoga is something given freely, so I don't think it's necessarily appropriated. And certainly it is a universal tool that moving your body in these ways and doing these breath patterns really make a tremendous change. And so I still do those things. I just really try to move it more towards an experience that is indigenous to me and where I come from, rather than feeling like I'm just taking it from a group on the other side of the planet. But
so can you tell us what does that look like for you today?
Well, in regards to physical practice, my physical practice is not as robust as it used to be. I used to be somebody who did like an hour to 2 hours of yoga every single day. And I still do yoga every day. I still do postures every day, and I still do breath work every day, but it's a smaller part of my routine. So I will do my downward dog, I'll do my lotus pose, I'll do my side bends, cat cow, up dog, I'll do tree pose, I'll do headstand and handstand, and the warrior poses. And that's kind of the extent of my physical posture that I do daily. Sometimes more, but around that. Some bridge pose and some wheel pose. And then I will do some breath work. I usually do Nadi Shodhana. I usually do solar breath or lunar breath. And I usually do Shitali Pranayam with the tongue. And so those are things I do every day. But the one consistent thing that has remained is my meditation practice. And so the school of yoga I trained in drew its influences from Kashmir Shaivism, Vedanta, some Vajrayana Buddhism, which is Tantric Buddhism, and Shakti Shiva Tantra. So that was kind of the lineage or lineages that I developed my yoga training in, and those meditative techniques are still very much a part of me. So if this is my YouTube studio, but also my meditation space, and all over on that side are all my deities. So I've got paintings and murtis, statues of different Indian and Tibetan deities. I do visualization practices with them. I do mantras every morning. So I do like a famous one, Om Namah Shivaya. I do that pretty much every day. I have a series of different mantras with different deities that I use. I do different chants. It's like I do a chant to Shiva every morning. I do a chant to Lakshmi every morning. I do a Hanuman Chalisa every morning. So even though I don't necessarily view myself as specifically being just first and foremost a yogi anymore, it is so much of what I do and is very central to my spiritual practice.
I hear that, because sometimes too, like nowadays when we're like, oh, I'm going to yoga and I have my fancy mat and my new leggings, and it's kind of gotten a whole new evolved sense of when someone says they're doing yoga, it sounds very much like they do many things of what you do or parts of what you do, but nowadays it's like you said, the cultural appropriation, and it's great that now we have yoga in every corner of the world, and we can do practice at gyms and dance studios, and it's very accessible and anyone can have pieces of it. But I hear what you're saying with the evolution, and since you've been doing it for a long time, coming back to the root and coming back to the lineage and knowing what you're practicing and where it's coming from. So that's something, it sounds like a huge part of your practice that you're able to apply in everyday life. But do you also share it with your clients and your...
I do, and I want to be clear. Like, I don't think a lot of yoga is culturally appropriated, because a lot of it is freely given, and I think cultural appropriation is such a loaded term, because what's the difference between cultural appropriation and cultural sharing? You look at, I think spices are a good example. Some of the same spices are used all over the world because of trade, because they weren't indigenous to that culture, but they came to be so. You think of Italy, Tomatoes are not native to Italy. They were actually brought over only a few hundred years ago, and yet now they're like authentically Italian. So what is that same thing doing with spiritual practices? Now, people from India came to the US and freely gave these practices. You look at people like Yogananda, and so it wasn't us coming and taking it unwillingly. It was something that was given. And we look how certain words have entered the cultural zeitgeist in a way that they now feel authentically ours. Words like karma, like everybody knows what karma means. It's a word that people use freely. Words like yoga, used very, very freely. Nirvana, like these terms related to more esoteric meditative states have become a part of our culture. And I don't think any culture specifically has a copyright on physical positions you put your body in or different ways that you can breathe. These are things that are seen across cultures and across times. For my own self, the one thing that I've just been kind of conscious of is, even though I was very familiar with the Sanskrit and something that I was often using to kind of justify my knowledge, it's something that I've backed away a little bit from, just to say, okay, that's not my language. So let me take the heart of it, let me take the ideas behind it and adapt it for where I am and how I am right now. Me using the word culturally appropriative might be a little harsh. I just want to be respectful of the places from whence it came.
Yeah, which you can do when you have that knowledge and that background. So definitely not taken for granted.
So I know one of the things we discussed that I wanted to bring up today for your crew was this idea of what is the purpose of yoga and why do we do it? I know something you've talked about with them have been the 8 limbs of yoga, which we can go over briefly again if that's something that is useful. But why do we do physical practice? And if you had asked me years ago, the reason I had always heard was we do physical practice because it prepares us for meditation, that calms the nervous system, it opens up the body, it aligns things and reduces tension so that when we go to sit in meditation, we're more prepared to do that. And while they don't now disagree with that, I actually think it's a lot deeper than that. I think physical practice in and of itself can bring you into a state of God consciousness, nirvana, samadhi, cosmic union, whatever you want to call it. I have myself experienced on numerous occasions where I go and do a full yoga asana practice. And by the end, I am transported. My mind and my body are not in the same place as when I started. I feel a union with everything. So I think it's an amazing practice in and of itself, just doing physical postures. Now it is, according to Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, one of the 8 limbs. And when I was taught the 8 limbs, I was taught that they were kind of progressive. One led to the next, led to the next, led to the next, which again, I don't think is untrue, but I do think that actually within each, you can find a gateway to your ecstatic self, to this radiant state of being. So one of the earlier limbs is Hatha Yoga. It's considered the 3rd limb, physical practice. And traditionally, how we practiced physical asana was very different. There were not all the postures we did now. There were far fewer of them. Each posture would have been held for a much longer amount of time, usually at least 10 breaths, sometimes longer than that. So this idea of inhale, move, exhale, move, do a sun salute, all right, chaturanga, jump, is kind of a new adaptation. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We got to find what works for us. And we're a very fast-paced moving culture nowadays. We're very chaotic. So giving our body something quick to do, I think, can be really beneficial. But I think it's also worth being aware of where did it come from. The first 2 limbs in the 8 limbs of yoga relate to our conduct with ourselves and with the world. They're called the yamas and niyamas. So with the yamas, we have ahimsa, do no violence to others and to yourself. Satya, truthfulness, always make sure that you are living with integrity. Asteya, non-stealing. Brahmacharya, purity, often translated to mean celibacy, but actually there are times where celibacy can be useful in your spiritual growth, but it also just means conscious use of your life force and making sure that you are using it intentionally and using it well. Then, of course, there's aparigraha, non-greed, non-hoarding. And then we have the niyamas, saucha, purity, santosha, contentment, that we find peace being where we are. Tapas, persistence and hard work. Ishwari pranidhana, remembrance of your divine self. And then also svadhyaya, study of scriptures and study of yourself. So those things take us on a surface level into a more connected state of being. And then when we get into our body through Hatha Yoga, that's the next limb. Then we move into pranayama, which takes us into the more of the subtle body, the pranic body, by controlling our breath and our life force. I didn't used to find a lot of benefit in pranayama until I took a trip to India and I went and did a workshop with somebody who has their equivalent of their PhD in yogic history, and was amazed at how a good pranayama teacher can really transport you into an altered state of consciousness. And then the next limb is something that I think is really challenging for our modern world and something that most of us are not good at. And that's pratyahara, or withdrawal of senses, turning the senses inwards. And I've often heard it described as our senses are a little bit like a Swiffer. It's really good at soaking things up, but after a while they start to get clogged, and life loses its enjoyment. So the more you taste, the less enjoyable tasting is. The more you look at, the less delightful the sights become, because our senses get dulled. And so by turning our focus inwards and not rejecting the outer world, but giving a space from the outer world, it allows the senses to refine themselves, to become clearer again, and we find deeper appreciation with the sensory world. But also, Pratyahara also trains us that, yes, all the world is out there, but it is also in here. Our light is in here. God consciousness is in here. And so by changing your awareness from being the outer to the inner, we start to realize that the universe is within us and everything we need is right here. So then that takes us to the next limb, which is dharana, or focus, which is learning to train your mind to be in one place. I think one of the discouraging things I hear from people is, I can't meditate. My mind goes everywhere. Well, that's a meditation. Meditation isn't necessarily being in that state of one pointed focus. It means training your mind. So if you sit down to meditate and all you can think about is dinner or needing another chocolate chip cookie, which is frequently something that comes up in my meditation, that's okay. That is learning to focus. And depending on your doshas, depending on the elements that make up your body, you might be somebody who's really inclined to a quiet mind and focus, or you might be somebody who's really inclined to a very active mind that's always creating and problem solving. In which case, that's going to be your experience, at least for a lot of the time, and that's okay. And that leads us to the state of meditation, dhyana, that where you start to feel yourself moving into a state of connection, moving into a state of flow, that you become connected with whatever the focus of your attention is, whether it's your breath, a candle, a flower, a deity, a mantra. And ultimately that leads us to the eighth limb, which is samadhi, or cosmic unification, that your boundaries between self and the universe have dissolved. You've reunited with God consciousness, or the oneness, or the oversoul, Gaia, whatever you want to call it, and that you have recognized that you are a divine being taking physical form, and not just a mental level, but an experiential level. So I think it's pretty typical, as we explore these eight limbs, for individuals as they go on their yogic journey or their spiritual journey to identify with one of the limbs more than others, and how that changes over time. So I think it's very normal for somebody to say, right now I'm really into breath work, or right now I'm really into meditation, or right now I'm really into physical practice, or right now, you know what, I'm just doing the best I can to live an ethical life and do my stuff out in the world. And that's still all yoga. That's all union, which is one of the translations of the word yoga, is union. And I think it's interesting also just to look at, what does the word yoga mean? And one of the definitions is the connection between a rider and a horse. And I like exploring this because if you've ever seen somebody who's really skilled at riding a horse, they're not jerking the horse around. They're not trying to like wrangle it. It's almost like a telepathic communication, with the most subtle movement or adjustment or gesture or touch can create a change in direction, a change in movement. And that's the kind of state we eventually get to, where when we start out on our yogic journey, everything is very forced, it's very hard, and we feel very uncoordinated. But things get more refined, more subtle, lighter, more delicate. Delicate in the sense of refined, not as in fragile, but it becomes almost like a fine lacework, where the smallest little adjustment can create a tremendous opening or a tremendous change. And so we yoke ourselves to that eternal, vast consciousness within, because that's who we all are. Every one of us is an incarnation of God consciousness, and God consciousness is being defined as Sat Chit Ananda in Sanskrit. Sat is truth, Chit is consciousness, and Ananda is bliss. That at our core we are all truthful, aware, blissful beings. The energy of God is bliss. And so when we go deeper and deeper within, that inner luminosity, that inner bliss, that inner truth, that inner light is revealed, and we recognize that's who we are. And as we recognize that's what we are, we recognize it in each other. We see that every being, human, animal, plant, landform, everything in creation is also that consciousness incarnate. And so when we end a yoga practice and say namaste, what we're saying is, I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that the divine within me is also within you and within all beings. And I bow and honor you with respect because you are God incarnate, and so am I. And so I think this is a really beautiful, beautiful practice. Just to circle back to our conversation a few minutes ago about appropriation, one of the things that I think is really interesting is I grew up being raised Christian. I grew up Methodist. And I'm somebody who nowadays, I have no issues at all with Christ's teachings. I think he was a beautiful, beautiful spiritual teacher. I have issues with modern Christianity and the hypocrisy and how his teachings have been warped. But one of the really interesting things is when you look at non-canonical texts of the Bible and you look at things like the Gospel of Thomas or the Gnostic Gospels, you read them and they are basically yogic sutras. And what's really interesting, as some of you may already know, is that there are monasteries in Tibet that talk about this wonderful spiritual teacher who came from the area that Jesus supposedly lived, studied for several years and taught for several years in India, in Tibet, and then eventually returned back to where he grew up. And then after some time returned back and spent out the rest of his days living in a monastery. And there are several texts, most of them kept in secret rooms, but have been verified as they do exist and people have seen them and have read them. And so I think it's really interesting to think as we talk about cultural appropriation, wouldn't it be very interesting if at some point it revealed itself that Christianity is actually a yogic tradition and that we lost that connection, we lost that tether as seeing it as such, but what if these that seem like desperate world religions were actually much more similar and had much more in common than people thought?
I think that's with any, like, yoga is generally non-dogmatic, but when we think about going deeper into Muslim or Judaism or Christianity, like the roots, they all start at the same place. So it's all interesting how it all comes together. And the more we go into it, the more we realize, like you said, we are all one. And like you said, the light that's inside each person, then once we can see that, then we're all really trying to do the same thing and being our own authentic yogi or whatever we want to identify with, human beings, to just make the world more beautiful.
And I just remembered you asked me earlier, do I do this work with my clients? So yeah, absolutely. So my goal in helping people on their spiritual journeys is this idea of reconnecting with that consciousness within and coming to identify with that. And even if though you go on my YouTube and I don't really talk that much anymore about mantras and yogic philosophy, when I work with people one-on-one, they're such amazing tools that it is something I give people to work with. So giving people mantras or sometimes giving people a deity to work with, depending on what they want to focus on, can be really useful because those things are just vibrations. They're a specific vibration that we can attune ourselves to draw more of that quality into our life. So if you're experiencing a lot of obstacles and want to experience a lot more freedom in your life, doing Ganesh mantra, working with Ganesh can be really helpful. If you have a lot of wounds regarding your mom, and that's the relationship that on a earthly level is never going to get healed, doing work with the Divine Mother and doing some mantra with Durga or Lakshmi or Kali or Saraswati could be really useful. And I encourage people who have connections to other traditions that maybe I don't know as much about, like if you have connections with a Germanic tradition or a Greek tradition and you want to work with Dionysus or you want to work with Odin, then by all means, please. We all have our own cohort of spiritual guides and entities that help us, so find the connections that work for you.
It's awesome. And so that happens like in a group setting, or it's more one-on-one with your clients?
Both. So I do a couple times a year, I do group retreats, and I have one coming up at the end of December.
I saw that.
Yeah. And then our next one will be in May. And then I'm also working in this next year, 2025. My hope, my kind of big goal is to have more of our own physical space so that it becomes easier to do in-person group work. So that's one intention I'm holding. But yeah, every week I do one-on-one work with people, usually virtually, usually meeting online like this and helping us all to go a little bit deeper with ourselves.
Awesome. And when you bring people together, do they know each other, or it's generally like for a retreat setting, it's people who've been in the same group coming together maybe from online space into real life, or they're strangers and they
Yeah, most of the time they're strangers. On this upcoming retreat, I think we've got 4 repeats from previous retreats. So they'll be fun that some of them know each other already. But usually it's new people. Some of them are one-on-one clients that I've worked with before. Some of them are brand new to me. And so one of the things I do is I ask everybody who wants to come to fill out an application that just really talks about intention. Why are you here? What do you want? What are you looking for? What has your journey been thus far? And then I interview everybody that applies. So I want to make sure that I connect face-to-face and heart-to-heart to make sure everybody's there for the right reasons and that they're going to vibe with the group, and to set expectations so that people come and get what they want. And I think one of the things that I'm sure you guys run into as well, as being people who are body positive and nudity positive and sensuality positive, sometimes people think, oh, I'm going to come and it's going to be this big orgasmic love fest. I'm like, no, that's not necessarily what I do. I have nothing wrong with that. But what is the intention of us being here? And the intention of being here is personal growth and development. And so if you want to go have some sexy time, you can do that after the retreat's done, or in the evening after our programming's done for the day. But I want to make sure you're coming for the right reasons.
That's what as we organize more and more, that's instead of casting a wide net and saying everybody come, like our first one retreat that we organized, we had like 25 guys, which was amazing. And we had so many fun connections and there were so many different directions. But now the more we go forward, the more we, same idea, like fill out an application, not to exclude people, not to say, no, it's not for you, or just kick them out, but essentially to say, well, just to be honest, this is what we're offering. We're actually going to do yoga. We're actually going to do physical practice. We're actually going to do breath work. This is the itinerary. And with what you're saying doesn't necessarily match. So are you sure? And then often we don't hear back.
Yeah, same. And it's one of those things too where I think the totality of the human experience is beautiful and sacred. I think every part of us is holy, including our shameful bits, including our sexual bits. And there is a time and place for all of that to be celebrated. But it's also an acknowledgement too of we all have wounds. And when we step into those spaces, those wounds often come to the forefront. And oftentimes, the most difficult thing, and especially, both of us mainly work, I think, with gay men, many times for gay men, it's very easy to move into overt sexualization, something most gay men are very familiar with. But most gay men also have a lot of issues around vulnerability, authenticity, intimacy, connection. And so I think it's a lot more interesting to kind of play with that middle ground space of saying, hey, I might invite you to come here and we might do some shared breath work and do some pranayama together, and I might hold you. But what is it like to actually just allow someone to hold you? Like, when was the last time you let somebody cradle you and you had nothing you had to do in return? You just had to sit there and breathe. And you'll see these guys who would have had no issue taking off their pants and getting busy, asking them to just be held and to breathe, and they break down sobbing. Because they're like, I don't know how to do this. And I think there is such a lack of intimacy, like true intimacy in the gay world, and lacking of connection. I have heard from individuals saying, I'll go try and get a hookup on Grindr, but really the only thing that I wanted was to be held. I really just wanted someone to hold me. And so I'll go and have sex with someone just so I can have the cuddles at the end. And how sad that is that we live in a world where it's not okay to just ask for that. It's not okay to say, I might be a 37-year-old person or a 45-year-old person or a 60-year-old person, but I still want to be held and cared for. And we live in a world that is often so uncaring and so inconsiderate and sometimes even cruel. And it doesn't give us the space to be vulnerable and to really ask for what we want. Gay culture can be very toxic, of having to show up acting a certain way and having a certain type of swagger in whatever aspect of the community you perform in. Swagger as a macho alpha mask guy, or swagger as a little femme Twinkie fairy. It doesn't matter. Like, that you're supposed to be performative as opposed to just being real. And opposed to just having a really heartfelt connection and say, hey, I've been on a journey. It's been hard. Can I share a little bit of it with you? And would you share a little bit of your journey with mine? And let's have a moment of coming together soul to soul. And that's what interests me.
Totally. Whether we call it yoga or, getting together or whatever we want to call it, it's so important nowadays, I think, for people to see people and to get together and let the guard down, let down the walls, and start tuning into what we really need. I think online or in person, when we do naked yoga, a lot of the guys who sign up for our classes online or our retreats, they come for the naked aspect, but then they get into the spiritual or personal growth element of it. And we've been doing online naked yoga since 2020, and we have some of those same guys going into 2025. So it's pretty amazing to see how it's just evolved, and how so many guys have even just showed up online or come to retreats or just been in connection with us and found maybe they started with naked yoga and then they got into something a little bit deeper, but it can be that entryway, that gateway to so much more.
And that's totally cool. Show up and say, I'm here because I'm titillated by it. Great. Be titillated. And also, let's take it to something a little bit deeper or higher.
That's how it gets you.
Exactly. You know, I heard in meditation once, we've been given these bodies so people will look. Once they're looking, make them listen. And I kind of like that, just saying, you know what? Come in, the eye candy's fine. But that's not all there is. Come for the eye candy, stay for the soul.
Need a t-shirt with that.
Yeah, maybe I'll work on that one. Would you like to do a little meditating together while I'm here today?
I would love that.
So let's get cozy, settle in. I'm going to sit upright on the floor. You do not have to if you want to lay down or you want to lean back in a chair. All of that is welcome. And we're going to start off just by simply observing where we are right now. I think a lot of people rush into, okay, I got to slow down. I got to breathe deeper. I need to make sure my back is straight. Just let that go. Just simply be where you are and just notice it. Notice, how does your body feel? Notice the state of your mind. Notice the state of your breath. Notice your shoulders, your back, your hips. What would it be like to just accept that you as you are right now are perfect? That you didn't need to fix anything. You were already where you needed to be. This isn't me saying we can't make change. It's just pondering the question of, what if right here we're beautiful? What if right here we're enough? Santosha, contentment. And notice how just that acknowledgement, the permission to be where you are, just that usually creates an element of change. Notice how just by simply allowing yourself to be where you are and observe it, has something shifted? Have you maybe breathed just a little deeper? Have your shoulders relaxed a little more? Has your mind become a little more settled? Follow the breath in and out. Notice its texture. Notice its shape or its colors. And your only job right now is to just simply relax, observe, just be. Everything go. Remind yourself that there's nowhere else you need to be at this moment. You just need to be here. Observing yourself. Being with yourself. The world can wait. There will always be more to do, more to see, more to achieve. At this moment, you just need to be here with you. So let the world fall away. Dive into yourself. Feel your mind's eye sinking lower and lower in your body, dropping down from the forehead, through the throat. Swallow if you need to release. Down into the belly, down into the hips, down down into the pelvic basin, even into the floor beneath you. Go down as low as you can go, deep down. And notice how safe and quiet it is down here, buried deep within. Breathe down and into this space. If you need to. And imagine yourself growing roots down into the soil. Feeling yourself become one with the land, anchoring you into this space, into this time, into this landscape. You are part of everything, and everything is a part of you. All is well, all has been well, all will be well. And imagine yourself being like a great tree, rooted down deep into the soil, reaching high up into the heavens. A tree that lasts centuries, maybe even millennia. There were great mother trees of the forest that would last 800, 1,000, 1,200 years, 1,400 years. Sadly, they were all cut down. But imagine yourself being one of these ancient, wise, protective, tall beings, deeply connected with the world, letting ages come and pass, and yet you stay grounded, you stay rooted, you stand tall here, centered here. You are part of everything, and everything is a part of you. What's really interesting is trees mature and they start growing into these many decades, many centuries old age. The chemicals they produce actually start to change. They're able to chemically affect the lands around them in new and unique ways, communicating with other plants, other trees, nurturing them. Trees have biochemicals analogous to our own neurotransmitters. They have a plant version of serotonin. They have the plant version of stress hormones. They are more like us than we think. What wisdom do you find in allowing yourself to become one of these great trees? What do you find as you allow the forest to become something truly alive and sentient, and not just dead pieces of wood? What if you realize that you too are like this tree, that you are rooted into a landscape, sending messages constantly to the beings around you, communicating in nonverbal terms? But like this tree, you too are growing taller, more rooted, more solid, more part of this ecosystem. You are something vast and eternal, powerful, wise, beautiful. Take one hand and place it on the center of your chest. Feel your life force emanating outwards from this place Imagine a light shining in the depths of your chest, the Anahata chakra, shining out into the world, a beacon for others to follow. As you shine out your love, your bliss, your truth, your consciousness, Satchidananda, the deepest state of you. You are a part of everything, and everything is a part of you. And as you offer out that love, notice how love comes back at you. This universe exists in reciprocity. What you give, you receive. What you send out comes back. So notice the love shining back at you. Notice how you are connected to something so much greater than just your limited self. You are a part of everything. And allow your hand to come back to your lap. Take a couple centering breaths, just noticing how do you feel now? What, if anything, has changed in your body, mind, heart, spirit? How is where you are now the same or different from where you were before we began? I'm not saying one's better or one's worse, just noticing how they're different. Or noticing how they maybe are the same. Whatever your experience is, it's valid. It's beautiful. On the count of 3, we're going to come back fully awake into the room, carrying with us this wisdom, this peace, this contentment we found. So slowly coming back for 3, 2, and 1. Namaste. How was that for you, Richard?
That was so beautiful. Thanks, Galen.
Well, and I'll just say, everybody watching this, even though you maybe weren't watching this live with us, time and space are not nearly as concrete as we think they are. So you are here with us. We feel your presence, and we are connecting in a shared space, even if you're watching this from across the globe or at different times or even days, hours, weeks, years, decades later. It doesn't matter. We're still here together.
Oh, that's the beauty of this all. Thank you.
Any other questions or anything else you wanted to discuss while I'm here?
Just where we can get more of you. You're on YouTube, Ecstatic Self, your Instagram, Kaylin, Ecstatic Self, and Patreon as well. So hopefully we'll see you on Patreon as well, because you've got a lot of great ongoing content. I'm such a fan. I'm always so impressed how you can create for several platforms, whether it's family friendly in YouTube or all the way up to adults only and OF. It's really incredible. So thank you for sharing this piece of you with you, and keep doing what you're doing, because if everybody feels as good as I feel right now after an hour with you, I can't imagine how beautiful the world would be if more people could do this.
You're sweet. Thank you. And I'll just say on that note, one of my goals is, in showing up all these different ways and all these different places, is authenticity and integration. To say you can be your real self in the bedroom, in work, on the playground, wherever you are, wherever you find yourself, you can fully show up. And I think so many people segregate their lives. They say, I'm a different person at a sex club than I am with my family. And to say, why? Is that making you healthy? What if instead we said, we all have our kinky bits or shameful bits. What if I just said, you know what, this is all me. Stop pretending, stop acting holier than thou. You've got them too. Let's just be real. And let's just show up in our full authentic selves and see what magic can happen.
This is next level, so thanks for bringing us there.
That's my sincere pleasure. Well, anytime you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always available. Shoot me an email. I do free consultation calls, so if you ever just want to chat. And I always tell people, I'm not the right guide for everybody. Nobody is. And so part of my job is to refer people to those who can assist them where they are. So, happy to send people your way, and just say the journey is long. Let's be kind to each other and find what helps us in this moment and gracefully release what doesn't, and just move forward mindfully together. Well, thank you for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to hang out with you guys, and I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, Galen.